I'm really not looking forward to the comments section of this video, but this isn't clickbait. I think Splatoon 2's ranking system is actually really well designed, and I don't want it to be much different in Splatoon 3. That's not to say I think it's perfect, and I will be discussing some of the issues I have with it later on in the video, but I think they're pretty minor. The letter rankings and X-Power system get criticized a lot, which, if you think about it, you should expect. Ranking systems are something people get their egos wrapped up in. You're going to take some flack if you're the one to show players with cold, unfeeling numbers that there are other players who are thinking about the game better and working harder. Usually thinking much better with a basis in top-level analysis and working much harder to a degree that isn't even healthy for most people. No one wants to be that messenger. It's a thankless job. It also makes a lot of sense for this particular ranking system to be criticized because it's Nintendo's Splatoon 2. I love this game, and I have upward of 4,000 hours in it, but that bias toward it doesn't cause me to turn a blind eye to the fact that it's made by Nintendo. Don't get me wrong, Nintendo's game designers are the best in the business. They're masterful artists whose names are not well known enough. They all but thanklessly make magic happen. On the business side, though, they can seem pretty out of touch with at least the Western competitive scene. I won't speak for the Japanese scene, I wouldn't be able to do so in their language. I can't see exactly what they're saying about it, but until Nintendo started delegating more to grassroots community organizers and TOs, their tournament rule sets were years behind the developments of the community rule sets. Nintendo events were still running turf war in tournaments at a time when most competitive teams never practiced it. Their events banned the use of the Splatfest T replica, which is mathematically the single weakest piece of gear in the game and also one of the only pieces of gear that everyone is guaranteed to have. They built a toggle in-game to disable gear sub-abilities, which no one I'm aware of has ever found a use for. Nintendo has also been criticized by the competitive scene for interference with the organization of grassroots events for both Smash and Splatoon. I'm not going to get too far into that, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest, but I wouldn't be doing the subject justice to suggest that rule sets are the only problem that competitive players have with especially Nintendo's legal department. How then, people might wonder, can a company that has so many misconceptions about the way people compete in their game build a ranking system that actually works? Here's the thing, they didn't. They took a really good ranking system from someone else and plopped it into the game as faithfully to the original as they could, and it works great. The Splatoon 2 ranking system is an adaptation of the Glico 2 rating system. It's the second edition of an improvement on the ELO system, a name you might be more familiar with from its use in other video games as well as chess, developed by a guy named Glickman, hence Glico 2. This source in the description gives you a fabulous overview of how the system works, and from here you can go on to learn about as much as you want to know about it, down to the mathematical formulas themselves if you really want to get into that. Here are a couple of key highlights about how it works. Everyone has a numerical ranking, just like they get in League battles or X-Rank, even if they're not X-Rank. X-Rank is just when that number is finally revealed to you, but it's always what's in the background determining who you're matched with and when you advance or get demoted. All that'll change that number is a win or a loss. KOs don't matter, KA doesn't matter, objective time doesn't matter, just wins, losses, and when your loss turns into a draw because someone on your team disconnected. The amount that your rating changes by depends on which team is expected to win. Glico 2 itself is designed for 1v1 competition, where you're just comparing the player's score to their opponent's score. Since you have 4 opponents, all with different scores, the game designer needs to adapt the system to Splatoon, which they did in a pretty simple, elegant way. The game will average the ratings of the 4 players on the opposite team, and act like you're playing a 1v1 against a player whose rating is that average. If you're expected to lose based on that comparison, you'll gain more points for winning and lose fewer for losing. If you're expected to win, you'll gain fewer points for winning and lose more for losing. If you're skeptical about that method, I would direct you to this master's thesis conducted by Cyrad from Rhetoric Gaming, where they test a variety of different choices for abstracting Glico 2 to team games. Link to that study in the description, really interesting work to think about. Sometimes the number of points you gain or lose will seem inconsistent with this idea, but that's because there's one other variable being considered here, which is RD, or ratings deviation. Every game, your RD changes at the same time as your rating, and the game tracks both even if it's only showing you the rating and not the RD. If your RD is high, you'll gain and lose more points than if your RD is low. This is the main improvement that Professor Glickman added to the ELO rating system. Let's explain what that variable is and why it's in there. If I only show you 2 games I play and ask you to rate me, you're going to do a lot worse at rating me than you would do if you had 100 games to look at. The fewer games someone has played, the less data there is, and the less sure any system can be, no matter how good it is. This is why you have to play 10 games in X rank and 7 games in League before the system will even give you a number. Also, some players are more consistent than others. What if a player has wins against 2,500 rated players, but also has losses to 1,900 rated players? In these cases, whether you haven't played a lot of games recently or the results were inconsistent, the RD will be high, meaning the system's less sure that the rating the player currently has is accurate. In these cases, whether you haven't played a lot of games recently or the results were inconsistent, the RD will be high, meaning the system is less sure that the rating the player currently has is accurate. The more games you play, the better the system will hone in on the correct score and the lower the RD will get. If you go inactive and stop playing for a while, your RD will start to rise since it's been a while since it got good data about you. Maybe you've been grinding in other game modes and you've gotten better since the last time it measured you. Maybe you've been getting rusty from not playing for a while. It doesn't know. So because the system is less sure now, it increases the RD. There's a really cool program written by Snowpoke called WooMeDX. The program uses an Android emulator called BlueStacks to access information from the Nintendo Switch Online app, and it can predict pretty well in real time before a game begins how many points you stand to gain or lose. It's not actually using the Glicko2 formula to reach these conclusions, and it couldn't get all the data it needs to make that calculation, even if it was designed to, but it is very accurate the majority of the time. Snowpoke recently made it open source, and I'll put links to that in the description. Bear in mind, it's made by a solo developer, and she's not devoting energy to supporting it anymore, so if you're having trouble, you might want to hop in Snowpoke's Discord server and ask other users who have got it working if you need any help. No need to be demanding about the free software she made just because she thought it would be cool and helpful, okay? Okay, anyway. Glicko2 is not specific to Splatoon by any means. It's used in most of the biggest chess sites online, it's used in CSGO, it's used in Team Fortress 2, Dota Underlords, Guild Wars 2, and a lot of other highly respected esports. Yes, chess is an esport. Open your minds, the future is now. Now, just because other developers use it doesn't mean we should just accept it. I'm going to address some of the most common issues I see people raising with the system. Complaint number 1 is that the system only factors in wins and losses, so even if you're pulling more than your own weight, you aren't always rewarded for that. Now, I disagree with this complaint fundamentally, because I think wins and losses should be all that matter. As soon as you start, for example, tracking KA as a metric for improving, people will be rewarded for KA at the expense of other factors that win games. Slayer weapons and armor farm weapons will outperform other niches because they get high KA numbers. There's a really great video that ProChara put out recently about the impact that a good Charger player has on the game.
Charger's, presence on the game isn't to do with its kills. Against good players, Charger isn't going to get a lot of kills, because they're not going to peek Charger. It's, can the positioning of Charger force other people to fight more awkwardly? That's how Charger gets value. That's how you'll see, Starburst, and sometimes Ice will get, barely any kills, and you'll still be, the most important player in the match. Compared to, other Chargers who will go for stupid aggressive stuff and then end up being completely unimpactful. Because it's not about the kills. It's about how you play around your team.
Now, a system that cares about KA, or even KDA, is going to reward their Slayer weapons and their Armor Farm weapons and not the Charger. Sure, you could track some other stats like time spent playing the objective to try and balance KDA out, but for one, some of those stats are still really hard to track. Like, how do you put a number to zoning pressure? And the closer you get to a comprehensive list of everything that can impact the game, the more difficult the system becomes to balance. You have to weight each of those stats so that none of them are rewarding people disproportionately to their cumulative impact on the game. And you better believe people are going to find ways to cheese the system for easier points. On the other hand, if you only measure wins and losses, whatever it is that causes you to win games or lose games, easily measurable or otherwise, will factor into your ranking if you play enough games for the system to get a good average. This way, any strategy that works for any reason is just as valuable as what people decide the meta strategy is. The game is not beholden to what the players or the developers think is strong. This is for the best because any developers, as busy as they are with the process of making the game and having so little time between a game that's finished enough to test and the release date, just don't have a chance of really knowing the top strategies better than the top players.
Tiki, I'm not sure why.
I have no idea
And
why.
he...
What? Wait. Well, that was too fast.
Sure, in some games, you can't have enough of an impact to prevent losing, even if you did well. But I think a lot of people also don't realize, one, that they probably get carried at least as often as they carry a game. Two, that a player can carry the vast majority of games if they're really better than the other team's players by a significant margin. And three, that overall, in the long run, these games where you play better and still lose are few enough and far enough in between that your ranking will still be very accurate if you play often enough. At a certain point, you have to confront the hard truth that you might just be grasping for any other thing to blame than yourself for a loss. Which is why I advise that if you start to get upset at something like the ranking system or your teammates, take a break. You're in a state that's highly resistant to learning and adapting, and you will probably sink yourself lower if you keep going. The second common complaint I tend to see is that the system seems to take away a lot of points for losing, while only giving a few points for winning. Firstly, I would challenge you to actually write down the point totals you gain and lose each game in X-Rank, and see if, with the objective numbers in front of you, you actually still feel that way. I would guess that between the +3s and the -57s, there were probably some nice +27s and +19s that you didn't think much of that balanced things out for you in the long run. Another useful way to think about it is to think about the difference between your score at the beginning of the session and your score at the end of the session. If you lost 70 points overall during your session, yeah, that's unfortunate, and it will take some time to make back up, but it's honestly not that huge of a difference at the end of the day. I don't think anyone will look at you all that differently as a player with such a small change. Now, one thing that can happen in a system like this is that the very highest performing players will start to be impacted because they'll be expected to win almost every match they play in. I could say, yeah, this is fair because you're an insanely good player, but I can also see how it might disincentivize people from trying to climb to higher and higher peaks. Having to win so many games in a row without ever slipping up becomes difficult and punishing, and it's really unrepresentative of coordinated competitive play. I'd argue that this is a problem of playing the game solo more than an issue of the ranking system. Splatoon is a team game, and at a certain point, if you want to be the best, you need to group up with other players who want to be the best and become a team. I know there are some solo queue warriors out there who get a lot out of playing it that way, and more power to them. But even having made a whole series on improving through solo queue that took almost 2 years to finish, if solo queue was all the game offered me, I would have quit at about 150 hours of playtime. That might sound like a lot, but remember, here's my current number. One way I do think the system could be improved to benefit these tip-top players is to change the letter system a little so that what is currently X rank is split up, maybe into X minus for what the competitive scene considers low-level competitive players, X for mid-level, and X plus for top-level. I don't know if top 500 would be a good cutoff point for X plus, or if they should make it a little bigger or smaller, but something in that ballpark might be a good idea. While X rank is already a tiny pool of players, something like 30 times smaller than B rank according to these numbers, these are also going to be the most active players in the game, putting in more hours than anyone else and playing more frequently during the ranking season on average. Splitting this group up means top-level players get top-level practice, and people straddling the borderline between S plus and X rank don't have to get curb stomped by the best players of all time every now and then. All of that aside though, earning a different number of points from each game is fundamentally an improvement to the system. I shouldn't get a ton of points from spawn camping a lobby of lower level players, and if I beat a team the numbers say I shouldn't beat, I want more points for doing that. If the devs don't design it this way, players will be able to cheese the system by sitting in a lobby they're doing well in with mostly the same players from game to game, and farming the flat number of points from them over and over to overinflate their rankings. This is the way you get a weapon to super fresh in Turf War. You don't play by yourself, where the matchmaking will set you up against a lobby of players that are similar in skill. That gives you a 50-50 win rate. If you're going to be losing 3 or 4 weapon freshness points per loss and only gaining 1 per win, you need 4 and 5 game win streaks. If you actually want super fresh, you join a lobby from a stream or a Discord full of lower level players than you and beat the weaker opponents. You can't choose who you play with as carefully in ranked, but that, to a lesser degree, is how the ranked system would work if we took this feature away. If you ended up in a lobby you were winning games in, you'd lobby back up in the hopes of staying with the same group of players. And if you lost, you'd leave the lobby, wait half a minute for it to fill up, and jump in to join a new one, which hopefully gives you better odds. Something which I've seen a lot recently is the complaint that the lower ranks are seeing more and more smurfs, that is, accounts owned by stronger players who restart the game or get a new copy to play in lower level lobbies. I think this lines up with ProChara's video series where he does a weapon nuzlocke up through X rank, that is, when he loses a game, he's unable to use the weapon he played with anymore. I think lots of people saw his experiences in lower ranks and thought it would be fun to try out themselves. While I haven't played in the lower ranks very recently, I did make this video series, maybe you've heard of it, where I smurfed to study the habits of lower level players. Here's the thing about that experience. This happened twice. The game is actually really good at pushing strong players away into the upper ranks after relatively few games. I noticed that when I was nearing the end of a progress bar, I was often at a higher power level than you usually are at that rank, and many of the players around me did feel like other Smurfs. Ranked has a pretty well-built learning curve, and one of the biggest gaps is between B and A rank. So if you end up in a B rank lobby with a power of 1900 or 2000, you probably aren't supposed to be in B rank, and the only players available for you to play against will also be Smurfs. I saw this a lot also in Turf War matches. Over time, as I played Turf War to level myself up to the point where I could play ranked on the new file, the level of the opponents that I was getting paired with went way high. It started off with, the baby levels, mostly single digits, maybe someone in the teens or 20s every now and then. But then, after maybe 3 or 4 games, I was already playing against prestiged players. You can kind of see the hidden matchmaking system at work, even there in Turf War. Now, even if it is more of a problem than it used to be, I would caution players in these ranks against automatically assuming that a stronger player is a smurf. A lot of the time, thinking that is a way of deciding not to worry about an engagement you lost because the other player was just better, and you don't expect yourself to be able to compete with him yet. But strong players welcome the possibility of playing against people who are better than them. There's a lot you can learn from that. If you do something that works against people at your level, but doesn't work against the stronger player, you've now learned that there's a more optimal strategy out there. If you do something that does work even against the stronger players, definitely keep doing that thing, because it works at a much higher level than you're currently playing at. you shouldn't get mad that a player on the other team was so good that you couldn't win, because you get the chance to learn a lot from those situations, and learning leads to winning in the long run. The only way this can go wrong is if you don't take the opportunity to learn from it and decide instead to complain about it. And like I've established, you aren't going to get a lot of those opportunities because that Smurf isn't staying in your lobby or in your rank for very long. So overall, my complaints with the ranked system have nothing to do with the numbers. I think the Glico 2 system is sound and a good basis for the game to work with. There are just a few gripes I have with the way Splatoon 2 handles the game modes that are built around Glico 2 that I'll go into briefly. My biggest issue with the current system, and honestly Splatoon 2 in general, is how ranked restricts people from playing league battles. Playing with teammates you know almost always improves any online game. It feels safer and lower pressure for less experienced players because they know that they'll still be on good terms with their teammates even if they don't play well. This is the best way you could possibly introduce a new player to the ranked game modes, but it's locked behind reaching a certain rank in solo, which means that not only do you need to perform at a certain level in ranked to ever experience it, but in order to even unlock ranked, you need to grind regular battles to reach level 10, which takes around 6 hours already. If league battles were available from level 1, a lot more players would reach level 10 when ranked unlocks with half an understanding of how ranked modes work. Imagine a C rank where players know how to open the enemy clan basket. It would be the best tutorial for all the modes that they can receive, not having to read a wall of text or watch a helpful YouTube video, but instead being able to just hear what they should be doing from their more experienced friends over voice chat. Even if you do have friends that play though, if you can only get 3 of you together in a lobby, you still can't play League, because you need either exactly 2 or exactly 4. It feels like it would be really easy to just fill league teams like they do in Salmon Run, where no matter how many players you have, even if you're alone, you can find as many teammates as you need through online matchmaking while still having space for all your friends to join you. It might complicate the system a little if players leave these lobbies a lot and your patchwork team has trouble staying together long enough to get a power, but I think I'd prefer to be able to play the mode and not get a rating than be unable to play the mode at all. The other place I see significant room for improvement is in the way the game balances team compositions. In addition to factors like distance between players, number of times players have recently disconnected from matches, and of course difference in power, part of how the game chooses which opponents to set you up against is by considering their weapons ranges. Sure, you might get a Hydra and an E-Leader on the same team sometimes, but the other team will probably have a similar backline-heavy mix when that happens. This is an improvement on how it used to work, where sometimes one team would be outranged and have a lot of trouble pushing, but I think there's a much better, more elegant solution. In league battles and private battles, before your team readies up, you get a set amount of time to see what weapons your teammates are using and adjust weapons and gear accordingly. None of your teammates can interfere and force you off the weapon you're playing, but this way you could spot issues like a lack of weapon range, a low amount of paint output, a lack of lethal bombs, or certain desirable specials, and correct them according to your best idea of how a team should be built. It might be tempting to suggest that people queue up for a certain role. For example, the game could guarantee that you end up with 2 Slayers, a support, and an anchor on every ranked team, but that would oversimplify the way the game is played compared to competitive play. Even if Nintendo perfectly understands what role each weapon plays, and all you really have to do is read Sheldon's explanations of these weapons sometime to know that they don't have the best idea of what a lot of these things actually do, there are multiple problems. Some top teams run anchorless comps. Some top teams run midline only. Building team comps is an art, not a science, and a role queue system has no way of accounting for a lot of these common strategies. Also, with the system I've outlined, you'd need twice as many players on Slayer weapons. They'd have a much easier time finding lobbies, while support players and anchor players might have to wait a lot longer. Even if Nintendo manages to design a game with 4 clear roles, unlike how the game has played competitively so far, queue times will still be different depending on which roles are popular or fun to play. One of the big advantages of Splatoon 2 as a competitive game is how little of a time commitment it is. A game of Valorant or League of Legends can take upwards of a half hour, even if you know early on that you're very unlikely to win. Role queue would make it frustrating to main the most popular roles, slow down queues for everyone regardless of their role, and bias people toward the playstyle with better queue times. So please, keep role queue out of Splatoon 3. If it's there, ranked will absolutely be worse than any of the previous 2 games. Overall, I think the current system accurately judges a player's contribution to their games to within 100 to 150 power points, which is pretty impressively precise compared to alternatives I've seen. There's a significant gap in Splatoon 2 between B+ and A-. You really have to be a better player to go from B+ to A- and stay there. That's what ranked systems should be designed to do. They should be designed to force you to improve in order to be rewarded, and not sugarcoat how you're doing if you're not improving. I think that most negativity toward this ranking system is, at the end of the day, a byproduct of people's egos being confronted with unpleasant reality checks. And look, I don't blame people for disliking reality checks like that. It's not fun. It's something that we're all inclined to push back against and want to fight. It makes us uncomfortable. It makes us feel existential dread when we're trying to enjoy silly squid paintball game. This is why we have other game modes than ranked. We can just play with our friends and mess around. We can play Salmon Run or Turf War. But for players that do have competitive goals, if we approach the game with humility, the mindset that there is still more to learn and that we're capable of learning it with time, a brutally honest ranking system like this one is an extremely powerful tool. It exposes when what we're doing isn't working, and it prompts us to try to learn and adapt. It can help us reach our highest potential as players, and to an extent, as people. If Nintendo brings it back in Splatoon 3, I will be glad they did so, and I will continue defending it to anyone who will listen.